What's up, Mavs Film Room family? Welcome to the Mavs Film Room podcast coming to you on February 26th, 2026. The Mavericks and the rest of the NBA are in the dog days of the season. We're just coming out of the All Star break. And that means that the NBA draft is coming into focus for the Mavericks as it's become clear that this is not their year. I think it was clear much earlier in the season that this wasn't going to be a winning year for them, and now it's just all about how high can they finish in the draft order. Cooper Flagg has missed the last 4 games with a midfoot sprain. There's no sign as to when he's going to return. Kyrie Irving has also been ruled out for the rest of this season, signaling that this is going to be a gap year for the Mavericks. And now, Chris Middleton, Klay Thompson, these are the guys that are shouldering the burden for the Mavs as we get through the final, 30 something, 25 something games of the season. So, look, the NBA draft is coming into focus today. We got a special guest joining us. We got Mohamed. He's a NBA draft analyst. Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone, subscribe to us on YouTube so that we can keep growing this channel. Appreciate everyone's support. But Mohamed, welcome to the Mavs Film Room podcast. We're excited to have you, man.
Hey man, thanks so much for having me. Super excited. And yeah, second appearance on this show, and I'm just super excited to talk some hoops with you guys.
Yeah, it's always great to get your insight on the NBA draft. And obviously, this year is a stacked draft class. A lot of exciting prospects, which makes it a little bit frustrating that the Mavericks have won their last 2 games, and this is coming after a 10-game losing streak when things were starting to look kind of good for the Mavericks' draft hopes. Before we get into it further, Vinay, how frustrating has this 2-game win streak been for you?
Look, like I knew when the schedule popped up that like the Nets and then who's the team we lost to before or beat the before the Nets? Oh, the Pacers. I knew that it was probably going to be W's for us, but what's frustrating is that some of these other teams are just aggressively tanking with lineups they put out and all that. Meanwhile, the Mavericks have been developing Chris Middleton and Klay Thompson for the future, it seems like. So like I don't know. Like I'm not the most. I wouldn't be that mad if they just won those games, but the fact that there was like no AJ Johnson minutes, not enough Tyus Jones minutes, no Miles Kelly's minutes, like you could, it's not that hard. Even see some threes from Daniel Gafford to see if he has some shooting touch. But I mean, it is what it is. I've kind of resigned with the fact that they'll end up with like the ninth pick, barring back-to-back lottery luck from Rolando Blackman and company.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, that does seem like what it's going to take for the Mavericks to kind of get where they need to be in terms of the lottery. I believe that they're eighth in the draft order right now. I think they went into the lottery with the 11th best odds last year. So they're still in a better position than last year, but I don't think they're quite where we want them to be. So Mohammed, let's start with you. Let's talk about big boards because obviously that's a good starting point, for the NBA draft. Um, who's your number one? Is it still Darren Peterson? I know he's had a lot of injury issues, some weird stuff going on. How is he on your draft board right now?
Yeah, I mean, currently as it stands, the number one guy on my draft board is Darren Peterson. I think he's just a remarkable guard talent. I think obviously we've understood the concerns with him with, the injury, him being able to kind of play out a full length of the game, a lot of it just being, very first half heavy, very short half in the second half. But comfortably, when he's healthy, when he's on his A game, when he's actually playing full length games, the best talent in the nation, especially of the big three. But yeah, for him, he just possesses some special shot making talent. It's really remarkable this season. In high school, he was primarily an on-ball guy, and I think coming into Kansas, this context, not really the best spacing, not really the best of physical contexts for him in terms of his injury, but he's really honed in as an off-ball talent, and I mean he's having a remarkable off-ball scoring season this season. So yeah, my number one overall prospect, it's going to be Kansas's Darren Peterson.
I
I
thought
know,
for sure
yeah.
you were gonna say Cam Boozer.
For me, Boozer and evidently is actually my second guy on my board. I think he's been the most productive of the three, probably the most productive player in the country, bar none. And he's just been super effective. I think one of the biggest things as to why I have Darren over a guy like Boozer is just really the defensive upside. I think Boozer just does everything so well. He's just a super versatile guy. He's just, strong low post guy, face up scorer, interior scoring. He has the post passing. Of course, he's able to connect the shots and hit from the perimeter. Super bully ball guy. I'm really not on the side of the NBA fence where people are saying he's not going to be able to translate. I think he's going to be perfectly fine. He's actually
It's
gonna be
the
very.
dumbest. It's the dumbest overthinking stuff. It reminds me of the Luca draft with how people have overthought just kind of Boozer's prospect profile. Like this guy's gonna. I think he's gonna be special in the league. I'm not saying MVP, but like I think he can be a top 10 player if he hits his upside. And he's already gonna like day one. He's gonna make the offense immediately around him better, just with how he passes, how he gets extra possessions on rebounds, and then on defense. I don't think he's even gonna be a liability like the Jokic Luka types. Like he's gonna get hunted on here and there because he has slow foot speed, but I mean, he plays hard. He's physical, so like you can't just like back him down or anything. It's got to be kind of off the dribble. So I mean, in most drafts he'd be number one, but I have the same kind of top two as you. Like I think Darren Peterson's number one. Also, we should probably transition to this a little bit. I think the narratives that are kind of out there on social media are kind of BS, honestly, because after the BYU game, after that first half he had, he probably could have shut it down. At least if you ask me, just and be the number one pick and be good. But I think the most logical thing for everything that's going on is that this is a guy that actually wants to help Kansas win the national championship. All the other like narratives that I see, they just don't really make sense. I feel like it's a bad look to like ask out of a game second half, but I also if you watch him just play from high school to this year, even from early on to the season to right now, like he just doesn't look like the same athlete when he drives and all that stuff. And I have some concerns with him on the playmaking and how he's handled doubles this year, but that guy's just a special scorer, and I can't wait to see him healthy.
Do you think that that's going to hurt his stock in the eyes of NBA teams and executives? Because, I hesitate to make this comparison just because there are two different levels of prospect coming into the draft. But Cam Whitmore is a guy who comes to mind. Like he was he was
Oh,
in that top 5, top 10 conversation in the 2023 draft. He fell all the way to the 20s. I don't remember what pick he was now, but there was some weird injury issues with him. I think there was some stuff in the combine and his pre-draft that happened, so that could have played a part in it. Do you think that these issues with Darren Peterson, real or not, and I think we all can agree that they're probably real, but do you think that's going to hurt his stock at all, or is he still the consensus number one?
For me, I don't think the attitude or the work ethic relative to a guy like Cam Whitmore is going to be kind of the same sentiment for Darren Peterson, where he's been able to compete at the highest level. He's been at all these NBA camps. Won the McDonald's All-American MVP against guys like this. So for me, it's like he really does step up to the plate. I think when you just realize this entire season, he's just not been playing healthy, and I think when you see how explosive of a finisher he was in high school, there really hasn't been any bit of that in the collegiate season. And you could see, there's a roster constructed on him. They don't have the best spacing in Kansas. And a lot of offensive labor is shouldered on a guy like Darren Peterson, where, like you said, the injuries, they're piling up on him. He's not really effective as a driver, but I think that's kind of where you've seen a lot more from him as a shooter, being able to be really effective in the off-ball scoring game, being able to do a lot more higher difficulty shots when it comes to the pull-ups, fadeaways. And, to Vinny's point, I agree. If he had shut it down after the BYU game, I mean, I don't think it's a discussion if anybody would be higher than him. I think he would be the number one overall pick without a doubt after that game. But I think as each game goes on, I think that door starts to creep up a little bit more, understanding, where's the availability. I think people are starting to think, is he going to load manage in the NCAA tournament? So I think once you start letting people just run with narratives, it just starts to snowball into its own thing. But
Totally. Yeah.
I don't think work ethic and attitude should be something that should get mentioned for a guy like Darren Peterson, where he's live saying it himself. If he could play, he would, and I think he's thinking long term. It's obviously a business in the NBA, and understanding why sell out in the collegiate game when he has a career waiting for him in the NBA. And I think that's the hardest thing when it comes to the collegiate game is those fans, they don't care about the NBA. They care about the in the moment, especially when it comes to. I've seen some rhetoric. Someone was saying, "Would you rather have like one $3 million NIL player or three $1 million NIL?" And it's like, at the end of the day, neither of the three are going to be better than Darren Peterson, and two of them are probably not going to be playing. So again, I think this rhetoric is just it's kind of what happens around this time of the year. People are just going to start with narratives and agendas, but that shouldn't take away from the type of talent that he is and what we know he truly is when he is fully healthy.
Yeah, he's a spectacular player, and I think when he's at his peak, there's no one in this draft class that kind of touches him when it comes to the whole full package game, the handling, the shooting, scoring, defense. Like he is like the guy that all NBA teams want. And so, hopefully whatever issues he's dealing with injury wise can get sorted out to where he's good to go by the draft and, can be the number one pick. Vinay, any additional thoughts on DP?
No, I mean, I would just say that it definitely is like one of the weirdest situations I've ever recalled in college basketball. Like, in spite of me being optimistic about what's going on, it is definitely unusual. And I also would say, like, I don't think his defense gets enough love. Like, he's, I think, by far the best guard prospect defensively, even over Kingston Flemings. And even if you project that to the next level, just the size that DP has over Kingston is going to help him out in the long run, too. So, I don't know. Like you said, he's a special prospect. I think he would go. I mean, Cam Boozer, and him and AJ honestly would go number one in most drafts, which is why this draft gets talked about as an all-time draft.
I mean, absolutely. And, Cam Boozer and AJ DeBonsa, I think, are the consensus 2 and 3 in this draft. You could interchange Boozer and AJ there. In your guys' opinion, who is the better player, or who is the the number 2 pick, and who's the number 3 pick of those two guys?
What I think is going to happen versus what I think, me personally, I think Boozer is the second best prospect in this class. What's actually going to happen is going to be AJ Devanza. I think of the three, AJ has shown the most growth of any of the three. And that goes without saying, coming into the season, I had a lot of questions about him, at 6'9", 210 pounds ish. Uh, Exceptional scorer, probably the best pure scorer in this class. But really was just, at 6'9", what else can he do outside of scoring? Is he able to impact the game as a defender? Can he be a playmaker? Is he a guy that can understand what offense does he bring when the ball's not in his hands? Is he somebody that can move off the ball? Can he relocate, understanding playing concepts? And especially playing in BYU under Kevin Young, who, formerly was an assistant for the Suns, and being able to coach a guy like Kevin Durant, I've seen a lot of reading about, Deban's taking a lot of inspiration as to why he decided to come to BYU because he wanted to get coached by a guy that ended up coaching a guy like Kevin Durant. So for me, I think AJ has really risen to the level of a number one talent in this class. And like I said, especially this most recent game that he had with a near triple double, 29, 10, and 9. I think that game personally is the best game of any prospect in this cycle, just relative to what you think of the guy and then how he's ended up playing in that game. And again, I think his ability to play make, I think he's shown a lot more of an upside as a playmaker than a guy like Darren Peterson, who, at this current moment, I think he has like a negative assist turnover ratio. He has a lesser assist percentage than Boozer or Debanza does. So I think Debanza has shown the most growth of any prospect of the top three. So I think it goes to say that the margin for error for a guy like Darren Peterson is very, very small. I think you understand that a guy like DP, who he could be the second overall prospect, he could be the third overall prospect. I think you can interchange any of the three, but as it stands, I think Boozer is my third prospect in terms of what might actually happen, and DP or being number one and AJ being number three, just because of the amount of growth. And I think there's still question marks with a guy like the Bands when it comes to kind of the shooting and 3-point rate and just overall defensive upside relative to a guy like Darren Peterson. But again, phenomenal talent, and I think he's been trending upwards, when it comes to conference play just as the season's progressed.
Yeah, because, I think that there's been some narratives, like, when we talk about these narratives that have developed around AJ DeBonsa not being quite the prospect that he was billed to be, and I just don't see it. Like, I watch this guy, and I still see a very talented player. Like you said, there might be some questions about how he can grow into some of the other parts of his game, but there's no doubt that with his athleticism and scoring ability, like, he's going to be a good NBA player, or at least he has everything that's needed to be a good NBA player. Vinay, in this Boozer versus DeBonsa debate, who do you have? Who do you have with the edge there? Do you think that Cam Boozer's supposed lesser athleticism could limit his ceiling as an NBA player?
I personally think Boozer's second to DP. I value like feel and how to play the game just a lot, and Boozer's just exceptional at that. And I mean, I like AJ a lot too, and like Mohamed said, like he's shown a lot of growth over the season, and he also said that shown more growth than all the other two guys have. But I just feel like Boozer just kind of makes everyone around him better to like a higher level than Debanza does. But I honestly think if the draft was like today, I think most teams would have AJ number one, even ahead of Peterson. But maybe that some of it was the question marks around his whole situation. But I would think most teams would have AJ number one, which is just, I can't recall a draft that had like three guys just interchangeable like this. Like one day you could have Peterson, one day you could have Boozer, one day you could have AJ. I mean, for me, like the whole year, I've just kind of had DP number one just because, like, getting a bucket, I still think is the most important thing in the game, and he does that, I think, better than anyone in the class. But AJ, man, like getting to the rim and the strides that he shows is freakish. Like, I'm not saying he's Giannis, but like it kind of reminds me of Giannis, just how he gets to the rim in like two strides from the 3 point line. It's absurd. So I wouldn't fault anyone for picking him over the other two guys, but like Mohamed said, like I don't think AJ. I think he's kind of overrated on defense. Like he has kind of the physical profile to be a defensive monster, but he gets beat off the dribble quite often. He'll make some help side blocks here and there, but it's not necessarily like it's not like Cooper Flag for sure last year to that level. And then he also talked about the 3 point rate, which is he doesn't shoot the three like the other two guys. So I would have him three, but I mean it could go any order.
Yeah, I don't think you could go wrong with either of those prospects, but I do think that the overall like finished product of Cam Boozer's game makes him a very appealing number two pick. And so we'll see. I mean, I think it really just comes down to who's picking at number two versus number three. If a team like Sacramento is picking two, they've long been rumored to be enamored with AJ Devansa. I could see that happening. But, you know, I think, like I said, either of those guys are well deserving to go to.
Let me
So-
ask this real quick. Mohammed, who do you think is the best fit? Not even just talent, just like best fit of these three guys. And if you say DP, who's the best fit after DP, like between Boozer and AJ next to Cooper?
Oh, 100% Cam Boozer. I think when you think of
Ball
Boozer,
knower.
the ID, and I would honestly say, again, I love DP. I'm just saying upside potential of the team and maximizing a guy like Boozer, not Boozer, Flag. I think for starters, whoever Dallas drafts has to be somebody that can shoot the three effectively and with a high 3 point rate to pair alongside a guy like Flag. DP out of the picture, the kind of upside in terms of just feel and just making the team better around you. If you were to pair arguably the two most winningest guys and guys that have just been battling it out, whether it's in the AAU circuit, at camps, in the collegiate level, Boozer and Flag might be one of the most dominant duos if that were to happen. So honestly, I think just the upside of what these guys are able to do in terms of making everybody better, extremely efficient. I think even seeing a guy like Flag coming into the season where the question marks were really on the offense, and he's kind of came in and just surpassed expectations very quickly. And I think it's still the defensive stuff that is kind of the superstar level things that we haven't been able to kind of see to the full extent. Granted, the team, a lot of injuries, just inconsistent lineups. I think one thing is for certain, if you were to see a pairing with Cam Boozer and Cooper Flag, that would be quite remarkable. I think the upside, that's pretty much your 3-4 duo for next 10, 15 years.
Man, that's so like tantalizing to think about, and that's what makes it so annoying when, look, I love seeing guys like Chris Middleton and Klay Thompson have their good games at this stage of their career, but man, like it's just every win is so costly, especially when it's against teams like Brooklyn and Indiana, like teams that are very much in the race for Cam Boozer and Darren Peterson and AJ Debonsa. Every win is just like a massive step away from that. But
Do you guys believe in basketball gods or statistical odds?
I used to believe in basketball gods, not anymore.
After what
Yeah, I
I've seen
mean-
this year, I mean, Super two question mark?
I believe in, I just want the highest odds and all that. I appreciate the sentiment and maybe the copium of some people when we win that like the basketball gods are going to award the Mavericks for ethics and all that stuff, but I would just rather have the higher probabilities at that point.
I mean, yeah, like what happened with the Mavericks last year doesn't happen that often. I mean, I think in recent years there has been at least one team that has moved into the lottery every single year, but to go from a 1.8% chance like the Mavericks had to getting the number one pick, I don't expect that to happen again, regardless of whether it's with the Mavs or with another team. And so, like you
Mhm.
said, Vinay, you obviously want to maximize, your chance to get one of those top four picks just from the sheer odds that come with it. Because last year was an outlier year. I think we saw Philadelphia, San Antonio, and the Mavericks all move into the top four, which I don't think that's going to happen again. So,
That's why people think
yeah,
it's rigged, is because like those top three is like just absurd.
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, the fact that three teams did it, I've never seen that before. So that was a real shocker. But let's shift focus a little bit from the top three. I think that's a consensus on pretty much everyone's board. Those three guys, but outside of that, 4 through 6, there are some intriguing prospects that are kind of moving up and down, depending on their performances of the week. I mean, a lot of guards, Kingston Flemings from Houston, Michael Brown from Louisville, Keaton Wagler from Illinois, Darius Acuff from Arkansas. These are all guys that I think could be in that 4 through 6 range. But Mohamed, let's start with you. Of those guards that I just named, who is kind of the leader of that clubhouse?
I think for me, this is where the game starts because if you asked me this maybe 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I think the consensus is a guy like Kingston Flemings. And I think he's just been on a poor stretch in terms of just shooting, and just general efficiency for Houston. He's been kind of tasked with a lot more responsibility, and I think that kind of opens up the room to say, what is the scoring process for a guy like Flemings? How is he going to be able to kind of score in the half court if, he can't just, mid-range jumper max his career. And I think the one thing for me, I think I've been leaning a little bit more towards guys like Keaton Wagler or a guy like Michael Brown Jr. to be that kind of like next echelon of guard to be considered. I think, when you think about guys like Caleb Wilson, I think he kind of has that fourth spot on lock. But I think the next guard, in terms of just general upside, I think it has to be Michael Brown Jr. I think this season, especially in the last 5, 6 games that we've been seeing from him, he's just been absolutely nuclear. I think being able to see him, just recently with his 45-point outing against Baylor, I recently just posted something that like no freshman has had more three-pointers made in a 5 game stretch than Louisville's Michael Brown. And he has a ridiculous shooting profile. Yeah, and I think the playmaking doesn't get enough respect. I think beginning of the season you've been seeing kind of like the shooting efficiency go up and down, and he was like sub 30% for like majority of the season. But again, he's just somebody where he's just not going to stop shooting. And I think that's something where that's kind of a quality that's very respected in the NBA, especially for a guy who, at a true 6'5", he's able to get downhill. He's actually be a vertical athlete. He's showing a lot more improvements on the defensive end. So for me, I think while I've been seeing like a guy like Mike Hill trend in the right direction, I've been seeing Kingston Fleming trend in the opposite direction. I think that's something where I'm kind of a little weary about a guy like Fleming's too. Maybe like I said, if you asked me a week or two ago, he might have been on that lock for the number fifth overall pick. But I think even a guy like Keaton Wagler too, who he's been very steady. I think Colin Boswell coming back, he's kind of taken a little bit off of his usage at Illinois, but I think this is literally where the draft starts. I think even at 4 too, because you can kind of consider teams where, fit versus best available. I think again, a guy like Caleb Wilson might be your fourth best prospect on the board, but it depends. What do teams need? And I think when you think about the guard play, all those guards bring different things. But one thing is for certain, like you look at a guy like Keaton Wagler, who he's a very like screen reliant, heavy 3-point shooter. But he doesn't have really defense. When you look at a guy like Kingston Flemings, who he's a very strong defender. He's a guy that can kind of have good pull-up shooting, but he's not a guy that can consistently hit the shot and just have a good scoring process. And when you look at a guy like Mike Hill, who it's kind of just three or bust. So for me, they all offer different prospects and different skill sets, and I think it's kind of just like I said, what teams are offering. But for me, I think it's Mike Hill that kind of leads that pack of guards. I kind of have it as Mike Hill, then literally right there. I'd say like a 4A, 4B. It'd be Mike Hill and Flemings, and then kind of a little bit of a drop off with a guy like Wagler.
Yeah,
If you were the Mavericks, if you were the Mavericks and had the fourth pick, would you just take Caleb Wilson, or would you take a guard?
I forgot. I want to say I forgot to mention him just because of his hand injury, but I would definitely agree with you guys that Caleb Wilson is my number 4 before any of the guards we just talked about. But Mohamed, I'll let you answer that question.
Caleb Wilson out of the picture because I think again, fit wise, I'm not really sure how that looks. I think a jammed front court is something, and again, when you're kind of trying to think of life as a Maverick outside of Kyrie, especially moving forward, I think having a guy that can again, be a three-point rate demon, I would consider picking a guy like Michael Brown Jr. with that next pick. Just considered, uh, we speak so much about like the nuclear shooting profile. It doesn't get mentioned enough how good of a playmaker he is, and he's arguably probably one of the best playmakers, if not the best, of kind of that next batch of guards. And again, somebody that you really don't have to insulate him that much defensively. He's a guy that can really, get steals in the off ball. I know for a long time I was kind of speaking with Renee about like, I think Flemings would be just like a home run pick for Dallas if they was available at that spot. But it's just really like, what does the offense look like? I don't know
Yeah.
if he really gives like lead guard potential relative to a guy like Michael, who again he has a nuclear shooting profile. He is a guy that's above rim athlete. He does have the size, and I think one thing again, when you think about kind of these next level guards, it's really just about like offering the high level shooting and just overall scoring process that I can kind of trust more in a guy like Michael, where he might have more inefficiencies in his game with the shooting, but I trust that he can get those shots up versus a guy like Flemings who, especially with Houston's context, it's kind of like a weird context and how he's even being this successful. I'm kind of curious to see how that looks like in an NBA setting where, is he able to kind of space the floor and rely heavily on the three-point shot when, kind of with Houston, a lot of it is he has to get downhill, and that's kind of where those windows open up for the pull-up shooting, two-point scoring. So I think again, I'm a lot more sure of kind of like the NBA upside having a higher ceiling for a guy like Mike Hill than kind of in the next match of guards.
Yeah, I mean, I really like Kingston Flemings. I think he brings like that true point guard skill set to the table really well. And like you said, recently he's been struggling scoring the ball, but I'm not saying that he's going to project to be this player, but he reminds me a lot of Chris Paul with the way that he's able to get to his spots in the mid range and hit those. But obviously, like with his size, like sometimes you worry about that too. But I think he does a good job of playing above his size for the most part. But Michael Brown, I mean, is probably the most explosive player of that guard class. I mean, that game against SMU that Vinay attended in person, like that was just like the full package of Michael Brown. And I think that's really what sort of kickstarted this recent momentum that he's had to potentially be the best guard in this class. And like, you look at his size at 6'5", his athleticism, his shooting ability. It's almost kind of what the vision was for Lonzo Ball that many years ago just never panned out the way that it should have. So um, I would love to have a player like him because I think that's a lot of tools that you can do something with. But Kingston Flemings, I think, would help the Mavericks just play like a more cohesive offensive style, take care of the ball, don't turn it over. But scoring wise, probably has much limited upside compared to some of these other guys. In our chat, Jamie Cardona 92 said, Keaton Wagler has been the guy for me for a while with his off-ball ability and range, and I think that is his number one skill set is just his shooting ability. He can, he's pretty much got endless range. But do you guys have any concerns that too big a share of his scoring comes from three? Have you seen enough from him in other aspects to sort of ease that concern? Because that's something that I have about him.
Yeah, 100%. I think with a guy like Walker, who again, that's his sell point, the deep shooting range, the ability to just be really cerebral when it comes to the PNR. I think those are the kind of two sell things that he can sell off in terms of he's just a high feel player when it comes to just the PNR game and then just being able to just effectively get shots off from deep. I think one of the biggest concerns though with him, it's just the limited athleticism when it comes to his bursts, the kind of the athletic pop. He's not really able to be like the most effective of drivers, so that kind of like leaves his game out to dry on the perimeter. And again, it's not somebody that can consistently create separation on the perimeter. So I think it's kind of like again a very similar case to a guy like last year who, similar context, a guy like Kasparas Yakuchonis who, very screen reliant guard that can shoot the ball at a high level, but it's kind of like can he get downhill and put pressure on defenses consistently? And I think when you don't have the athleticism to match, that's definitely a concern. I haven't even gotten to the defensive concerns with a guy like Wagler, where he's not really generating as much like steals and blocks to be somebody that contributes, especially at the size, like 6'6", 180. I kind of need to see more from him in terms of like what does he do when the ball's not in his hands. And I know how high level of a shooter he is, and just the context of Dallas. It's like you kind of need this guard that you take in to be your lead scorer, and as well as somebody that can set the table, but also offer something defensively. When, especially with these recent movements, it's like you really don't have much space to insulate your guards defensively. And I think a guy like Walker, who is probably the biggest uh, mismatch defensively on of the next batch with Michael and Kingston, I'm just worried with him in terms of like just the general like playmaking, not playmaking, but more so the defensive playmaking and just overall athleticism.
Yeah, yeah,
I
agreed.
think for Wagler's defense, I think you have to project it a little bit, just because. I mean, you could tell like he gets kind of pushed around on both ends. You can tell he's a limited athlete, but I feel like you can't necessarily guarantee the athleticism boost. Not going to probably happen, but like the weight and the strength, then you can definitely improve. Just a couple years in the NBA program and just eating every day. I think even before he went to college, he's already added like 20 pounds from high school to college or something like that. I don't know what the exact number is. So you can definitely tell he works at it. It's just something that if you draft him, and I definitely see the bust potential with him, like if it doesn't pan out, like the holes that Mohamed's talking about on the defensive end and the 3-point reliant scoring. But why I'm not as worried, I guess, with him as maybe others are, just because of the feel that he has for the game. And he gets to his spots, even though he's not a better athlete usually than whoever's guarding him. He's really good, I think, at making the right reads whenever like a defender like moves in the wrong direction. When he's going one on one, he's really good at just kind of reading where the defender's next steps are going to be and just takes advantage of their momentum against them. So I'm high on the kid. I don't like him as much as Michael or Kingston, but I mean he's solidified kind of the seventh spot, and especially for the Mavericks, like a guy like that that can just splash from deep is super important. So if you can do that, you get a boost over some other guys.
Who does he compare to in the NBA? Because I don't think he's as athletic as like Klay Thompson for that matter, right? But I don't think he's as I think he's a much better shooter than someone like Kevin Martin. Like, pardon me if that's a bad comparison, but I'm not. The draft is not my strong suit, so I don't know if that's a great comparison either. But do you guys have any players that Keaton Wagler could sort of project to end up as?
If he was 6'6", I would say like a Jamal Murray. I think one thing with him is kind of just the heavy PNR influence and just again the deep range. Again, I think I trust more in a guy like Jamal Murray in terms of just like overall athleticism and being more of like an above the rim guy. But that's definitely a name I would consider. I think another would be, I think just overall like the 6'6" archetype playmaking guy is Halliburton. And granted, I think Halliburton, one of his qualms is just being able to get downhill as much and just the pull-up scoring, which I think that's something that's different from a guy like Wagler. But
Yeah.
for me, I would probably say Jamal Murray. I think just kind of crossovers with just the stylistic elements of their game, just like PNR influence, the deep range shooting, good touch, and of course the feel in the overall PNR game. So I would probably say those are kind of like similarities with the guys that I look at.
Jamal is a great comparison. I never thought of that one, but I think that's a good one. Vinay, you have any names that come to mind?
I can't think of a good comp. Jamal's probably the best one. I don't. There's some outrageous comps with him. Like I saw someone comparing him to Shea scoring with Halliburton's playmaking. I don't know about all that.
Literally the
Um,
best guard prospect ever.
literally. Uh, there's some like there's shades of Shea, but he's definitely not the athlete Shea is, and definitely doesn't have the mid-range prowess. But like how he kind of like isolates and sizes up a defender, I can see some traces of that. Jamal Murray is probably the best one though, so I'll just steal that one.
I think
Yeah.
one thing that I think one thing that doesn't get mentioned enough is kind of his ability to change speed. Like I think he's very slow paced as a guard. He's not like super sporadic. I think when he's able to kind of just drive and use that PNR, I think like he jails guys being able to just play around the nail. He is just somebody that knows how to change speeds. And I think again, when you can make up for that lack of athleticism with the ability to just decelerate, accelerate, and just change your speeds at kind of like the flip of a coin, I think that's something that he has going for him. That again, kind of that athletic development and leap, it's there. I think that's something that, like I said, with being able to get more stronger, being able to just open up his game more in terms of like NBA strength and conditioning, that should be something that opens up more. So I think he can fall back into these like XL, decel, change of direction to add on top of the size, on top of the shooting, the playmaking. I think it's a very fine talent that we have right here.
Yeah, I mean that we've seen with Luka. That's a pretty important skill in the NBA. Let's talk about the back end of the top 10, and I do want to talk a little bit about some other prospects in the last 20 minutes or so. But 7 through 10, have we gone through 7 prospects?
That was 7.
7. So 8 through 10. Darius Acuff, probably the biggest name there. I think he's a bit of a controversial name just because of what type of player he is. Mohamed, what are your thoughts on Acuff? Is he too, he looks like a phenomenal offensive player when you watch him, kind of like a Keontae George or Trey Burke, but defensively, I think that's really where the concern lies with him.
For him, I think one of the biggest issues with people, especially in draft Twitter, it's kind of the understanding like what does he offer in terms of like what does he lack, especially at the size of what 6'2", 6'3". He's a very like stout 6'2", 6'3", so he's strong.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that people get misconstrued is just he's kind of an offensive engine in the sense that like he's able to just drive really effectively. He's able to get a shot off. I think coming into the season, I wasn't somebody that was like the highest on him in terms of is he able to create his own shot consistently. And I think as you've seen, he's kind of brunt the overall offensive load for Arkansas. And I think again, general concerns with a guy like Acuff, it's just overall the defensive playmaking. Is he able to just rebound as effectively at that size? And just is he somebody that can just lead your offense? And I think you've seen kind of the sentiment with shorter guards in the NBA. I mean, most recently we've seen a guy like Trey Young who is probably the best of that archetype in terms of just like a nuclear three-point shooter, all-time great playmaker, get shipped off for literally chips. He's somebody that, it's this sentiment that like shorter guards in the NBA are not going to be able to consistently, have a place in the NBA unless they offer some value defensively. And I think that's some of the worry with a guy like Acuff, where how consistent is he going to have the ball in his hands? Is he somebody that can really be effective in low usage scenarios? I mean, coming from IMG, coming to Arkansas, he's had the ball primarily in his hands, and he's been able to show you that he can score effectively. I think one thing that is concerning though is just again he's not the most athletic of guys, so I think that kind of affects him as a driver in the half court and just getting to the rim effectively. But I mean, in the most recent outing that they had with Alabama, 49 points on a bum ankle. I think you're being able to kind of see the things that he does when he's not getting to the rim. Being able to be a super high level playmaker, the 3-point shooting. I think that's something where if you asked me at the beginning of the season, are these things that are going to be there for a guy like Acuff? I'd probably say no. And I think that's something that where he's really developed so much so to the point where he's even in that conversation between 7 to 10. And I think people just don't like the size and then what he doesn't do on defense. But again, I think when you think team context, guys can be insulated. Guys can find ways to play make and open up the game for him in other ways. But I think that's just some of the worries that I've had with him. It's what does he do outside of the offense? And I think that's where, he's not really much of an off-ball shooter. He's not somebody that doesn't not have the ball in his hands. He's not a defender. He's not somebody that can rebound at a high level. But I think he's just been somebody that's super, super effective at getting to the rim and being able to shoot. And you're seeing it so far in this stretch and conference play for Arkansas.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you watch him and he's definitely able to lead the offense. But like you said, like in this day and age, NBA execs, and to an extent rightfully so, are enamored with size, and the bigger guards have become the kind of the industry standard of the NBA, if you will. So I think the smaller guards are always going to be at a disadvantage. Vinay, what are your thoughts on Acuff?
Yeah, I think Mohamed said it well. I'm not like, I mean, Mavs Twitter is a hellhole for Darius Acuff discourse. Like you'll have the side of Mavs Twitter that'll say he should be a top 5 pick. You'll have the side that's like this guy's not a lottery. I mean, I'm kind of right smack dab in the middle. I don't love smaller guards personally, just because of the defensive concerns that everyone has, I guess. But I mean, this guy's an offensive engine to this point, and this season, he wasn't on my radar before the season. I know he was a 5-star, but I thought he was going to be kind of one of those guys that stayed a couple years in college and just became like an Arkansas legend. But he's doing the Arkansas legend stuff in 1 year. He's already like known as like the best player to ever wear a Razorbacks jersey. That's what they're saying about him. So, I mean, I think he's definitely talented. For me, if like the Mavs landed in this range, I would still have to probably be talked into him. I might trade back. I mean, he's 8th for me, but I also think this range is just so wide. Look at how the draft is that you might just be able to trade back and get another asset. But if they took him at 8, I wouldn't like be pissed. I'm not doing backflips like I did last year for sure. But I feel like the small guards he gets compared to, like Trey Young, I think he's going to be better on defense than Trey Young. Brunson is kind of the high upside outcome for him. I don't know if he's ever going to reach those offensive heights that Brunson is, but I think he can even be a better defender than Brunson. But like Mohamed said, like the stoutiness, the strength is going to help him out year 1, I think, to where he's going to get hunted for sure, but I don't think it's going to be as bad as Trey Young. Like I don't like that comp at all.
Yeah, I think he's just got like a different and stronger body, quite frankly, than Trey Young. I mean, Trey Young is not only a short guard, but he's like doesn't weigh that much either, and he's pretty skinny. Darius Acuff, his body is already quite developed. You know, you see his arms, and like he's a strong dude. So I that's why I think Keontae George might be a better comparison for him. But still, you know, the people see the 6'3", 6'2" height, and I think it scares them. But I do think that he's got more defensive upside than a Trae Young,
I
or even
want
a
to
Brunson for
see.
that matter.
I want to see what he measures at the combine. Him and Kingston Flemings. I don't buy that Kingston is 6'4", and I don't know if
Yeah,
Acup's 6'3". So I do want to see the combine heights for those guys. And I think everyone, if you're entering the draft, is required to do all of that and the medical testing. So I mean, guys like Darren Peterson also have to like check out medically at the combine too. So those are going to be big data points for all these guys' prospect profiles.
Definitely. I mean, when you think about last season, some of the guys that really didn't have the hottest of like measurement testing and throws. I mean, the entire season, a guy like, for example, like LeBaron Fallon, who, one of my next favorite batch of guards, he was touted as like a 6'4" guy the entire year, and then he comes out 6'2" and a half, very on like the skinny side, and that was something that really impacted him, especially considering, what we see in
He's
guys
6'2.5".
last season in the and there was no shoes. So that was something.
Wow.
He was like 170, 180,
damn.
soaking wet. And that's where it's like, hey, that extra inch and a half really does change the narrative for him. And I think he's kind of came in and really changed his perception. But again, like I said, a lot of times those guys that you think are 6'3", 6'4". I was reading something recently about a guy like Kingston Flemings where in his senior year of high school, at the beginning of the year, like September 2024, he was 6'1" and a half, no shoes. So that is something where, again, do I buy that he's 6'4"? We're gonna have to wait and see. But again, it's kind of that year where sometimes team websites, draft sites, they kind of inflate numbers plus an inch, minus an inch. The weight numbers obviously don't update from the beginning of the year. I think that's why I always say I would love to have a draft like physicals combine at the beginning of the season and then have it at the end of the season as well to kind of see progression. I forget, like for example, Cameron Carr, he's grown like I think 15 to 20 pounds of muscle allegedly since the beginning of the season. That is again, I think having anthro testing at the beginning of the year and then being able to see it
Yeah.
at the season would really show just general development of a guy and just the physical stuff additional to what they do on the court. So I think that'd be really helpful.
Yeah, I think to be able to see that, and like you said, the combine always produces at least one or two of those shockers that oh, this guy's actually not as tall as they said he was. So
The reason I like Michael, sorry to cut you off, but
no,
the
it's
reason I
fine.
like Michael so much more than this batch of guards is I think he's like legit 6'5", maybe like 6'4", and his wingspan is just like I saw it in person. I couldn't believe like just how long his arms were, and I think that's a huge thing on defense, especially. And then like hand size, I don't think hand size gets talked enough about in basketball. I feel like it's more of a football quarterback thing, but uh, he was palming the ball at different moments in the game, which I thought like I don't think he's Michael Jordan in terms of palming the ball, but I feel like just being able to palm the ball helps you out like with where you want to go with on the court, and he has a way better physical profile, at least from what I've seen, than the Flemings, Wagler, Darius Acuff types, and on top of the 3-point rate, which is more important than even that.
I think piggybacking off that point, even the wingspan differential, I think I've seen something that was reported like I think it's 6'10". So, being a 6'4" at a 6'10" wingspan, being able to see, what that impacts when it comes to like deflections, lanes, obviously what is he able to do when he's kind of being able to play above the rim. I think being able to have these kind of different elements of like wingspan differentials, just looking at like positions like, he's on the taller side of the guard groups. He has a bigger wingspan differential than the guard groups. So these are things that are very important when you think about like how does this guy fit in NBA context on the defensive end, where maybe there might have been some of his concerns at the beginning of the season or playing above the rim. These are things that aren't issues for him. And I think those kind of like physical tools really do help him versus a guy where maybe like, years before, like a guy like Rob Dillingham, where, he has a negative wingspan differential, he's somebody that's on the frail side. You can see how it's obviously being impacted when these guys get hunted on the defensive end. So I think it's super important to think just outside of what they produce on the court, how does that project at the NBA level against NBA size, against NBA athletes, and what's kind of relative to their size, to their position groups. So I think that's something that's super important where I think I value that more now in prospects is kind of the biomechanics and the frame and physical profile. And that's why I think like a guy like Mike Hill, who +5, I'm gonna say +6, very like gracefully, wingspan differential, it could really be beneficial to him when you look at like maybe a Kingston Flemings, a Keaton Wagner, where Maybe Keenan Walker has like a 1 or 2 inch wingspan differential. It kind of impacts him as a defender, kind of impacts him just as a general guy outside of his shooting and feel. So just some things to consider about when you look at guys.
Yeah, Michael Brown has got the physical traits I think that you want to see out of an elite guard prospect, and I do feel like Kingston Flemings and Darius Acuff, like their arms aren't short, which I think is kind of helping them be successful. But Kingston Flemings, I definitely don't think he's 6'4". He looks like 6'2" at best when I watch him. But we got about 10 minutes remaining here, 11 minutes. But let's say the Mavericks do end up in this 9-10 range, which seems quite possible.
What about 15th when we make the playoffs?
Yeah, or end of the lottery.
Dang,
Who
we
are
need
some?
that.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Please no. Please do not make the playoffs, Chris Middleton.
I don't think there's a chance to make the playoffs, but I think there's a decent chance that they could be picking at the end of the top 10 or potentially towards the end of the lottery. I personally am not familiar with really anyone in that range, but Mohammed, who are some names that you're looking at there?
Yeah, I think one of the first names I got to mention is a guy like Dalen Swain. He's, from your guys' home state in Texas, who I think this season he is having the greatest self-creation season that we've ever seen from a prospect ever. He is number one right now in isolation points per possession, like 1.66 points per possession. He's doing it at a ridiculous, ridiculous rate. And that's not to say that there's other things that he offers. At 6'8", when you're kind of a 6'8" dribble pass shoot with plus anthros, really strong defensive tools, I think that intrigues anybody. And it was so funny because coming into the season, he transferred from Xavier, where it was like a very like transition heavy offense. And he was like he's the reason why they're like in the 98th, 7th percentile in terms of transition scoring. Comes to Texas, completely changes their offense, and horrible, horrible offensive context, and he has them as like a top 8, top 10 offense in the entire nation, despite them being like 200th in 3-point rate, bottom half of the country in rate, bottom half of the country in tempo. A lot of these things that point to them having like a very shit offense, he is one of the biggest reasons as to why they're just super efficient. And again, a guy that he's able to just dribble, pass, and shoot, offer you really strong feel, 6'8", probably 3+3+4 wingspan differential. I really like a guy like Dalen Swain, and I think he's somebody that has really shot up my boards. I have him currently number 7th. I think that's very overzealous. Um, but again, it's just more so understanding like how do these guys fit in NBA contexts. And I think he just has like some special anthros and just ancillary skills that, again, it's funny. Like beginning of the season before he even had this leap, I mocked him to a guy like Najee Marshall, where that 6'8" point forward, point wing that really could just connect the ball. It's just really the 3-point shooting. Like if that shot can stick, that's kind of where like the upside takes off. He's obviously a guy that can drive to the rim, good shot, good defense, good size. But it's just the shooting that kind of is like the swing skill for a guy like Swain. And I think he's upped his 3-point percentage, just 3-point rate this season. But I just need to see more volume, just improved mechanics. But again, Swain is definitely a guy who has a very like large outcome in terms of could he be at the back end of the lottery, mid first, late first. A guy that could be even in consideration for 29 or 30 for the Mavs. So just some things to consider about for where they might end up. And yeah, that's a guy that I've considered at least with one of the picks. I think another name is maybe a guy like Bennett Sturts, a guy who Iowa point guard. He's one of the best PNR playmakers just in the entire nation. Is super high efficient guard. I think with him being kind of on the older side, which I think that's kind of a lot of the sentiment with the guys. It's like you have these guys that are like the super, super young freshmen, 18, 19-year-olds by the time they get into the league, and then you kind of just have the older batch of guys that are like the seniors and juniors. I think with him, he's just somebody where he might be super high floor, maybe low ceiling, but it's just kind of what does he need and how is he like a plug and play for a team like Dallas, where again, he's a really strong 3-point shooter, really high 3-point rate, being able to just be super efficient. I think he has like one of the lowest turnover rates in the entire nation. And I think he's like second in the entire nation in just general minutes played this season. So super durable. He's always playing, and I think it's just that constant motor. And again, 6'4" guard that can really just set the table for offenses. I think that's something that could really be beneficial to a Dallas, where you look at that similarly in a guy like Kingston Fleming. So that's another name that I would consider. I think for me, it's just really considering what kind of prospects do you want to put alongside a flag. And I think it's guys that have to shoot the ball at a high level. It's guys that can create their own shot. And I think, like you're saying, seeing this season, with the movement and acquisitions, thinking of guys for the future like a Kyrie Irving, a Chris Middleton, developing other guys. How can this next guy that comes in and just can he get his own shot? Is he a guy that can really play defense? And I think that's something that you want to see in this next batch. And um, there's just plenty of names that I've kind of thought about, but it's really just depending on where you guys end up at. And I think that's kind of the open spot where you probably don't want to be winning and be on a 2-win streak right now to be excited about. But
The
again,
Kings are up by 12 right now, so that's good
Oh wow, this is
on the
great.
Mavs. I would have Swain right after Wagler if it wasn't for the 3-point shooting stuff. But like for
yeah,
some teams, I would have him eight. But like for the Mavericks specifically, it's just tough because I feel like the guy next to Coop is gonna have to be able to shoot threes at a high clip. So but I love Swain. I mean, he reminds me of Najee Marshall, like you said. I think he's going to be a better version of that. The way he gets to the rim is outrageous. His ball handling could use a little tightening up, but he still gets by his guy a lot. Sometimes he'll over dribble, but I'm not too worried about that just because Texas like needs it, and that's why he's doing it. I love Dalen Swain. You honestly put me on Dalen Swain, so shout out to you. And then Bennett Sturts. Uh, I kind of got enamored with him over the weekend, honestly, just watching some random Iowa games. And the guy just really knows how to play. The passing angles he takes are really creative. They play a really slow pace, but I don't mind that personally because I honestly think if you had me to pick a guard that played fast versus slow, like I would prefer this faster guard. But like being able to play in a slow tempo kind of shows that you're able to make reads. Like you're relied upon. Like I feel like it's more like a feel thing to play at a slower pace. And then even the age thing, like I know him and Yaxel Landenberg, we're probably not going to get to, who's 24, Sturts is 22. I can excuse away the age thing a little bit just because they were under recruited out of high school. They went to smaller schools. So like this is like their first year for both of them at Michigan for Yaxel and then Iowa for Bennett Sturts. But it's not like this is their first year they've broken out either. Like they were at small schools last year and broke out there too. Like if this was their first year breaking out, then I would be concerned. But because it's not, because there's some context to like the small schools they went to out of high school. Like I like both those guys a lot. I don't think they should be knocked too much for age. I understand why people might just because of the ceiling stuff, but those guys can really play, and I think they could be rotation players on playoff teams as soon as next year.
I think even to that point for a guy like Yaxel, where these guys scaled up in terms of competition. Going from UAB for a guy like Yaxel to Michigan and Drake to Iowa, they scaled up and have been playing actually better. In different offensive contexts, and I think that's something that really needs to be taken into account in terms of their draft outlook. It's like a guy like Yaxel. Granted, he's going to be 24 when he ends in the NBA, but what he's able to do in terms of he's 6'8", 7'4" wingspan, being able to just be super versatile, coming in as, previously the guy, and then coming onto a team where, super front stack loaded front court. He's able to find ways to impact the floor, improve his three-point shooting, just general feel. Obviously, he's a monster defensively. I think there's things where you look at guys and saying, what are the things that can stick in the skill sets or the tools, and saying, can that be really maximized, for guys like Bennett Sturts, super high level in terms of his poise, PNR playmaking, three-point rate. For Yaxel, a guy who's just super versatile, defensive monster, can really slot him as like a wing forward at 6'8". His anthros are disgusting. Being able to I think I was reading some tweet about where, when it comes to anthropology testing, where his numbers would rank. And it's like if he was to be in the NBA and he was getting, matched up metric wise versus other small forwards, I think he would have like the second highest wingspan differential. He would be like top 10 in height, top 10 in wingspan. So, looking at like frame and tools, I think these are things that like you see in a class like this where granted you get enamored by like the young talent, super deep class, but it's kind of like the back end, mid end of the draft that there's still a lot of gems. And picking lottery, picking mid first is not necessarily a consolation prize when you consider the kind of top end talent that's there. But in terms of like a ceiling to floor discussion, it might be different. But there's a lot of talent in this class. And I think again, when you're Dallas, considering where the range that you pick, there's so many names that we haven't even mentioned that there's like you're going to leave with something good. It's just a matter of, do you go for fit? Do you go for best available? And that's very dependent on where you're picking at, how high and or how low.
It's funny, Swain reminds me of like a better Najee Marshall potentially. I feel like Axel reminds me of a better PJ Washington at the next level, just like better, I think, honestly, at all the skills that you talked about.
100%. And I think, again, especially to Dallas' context, being able to have guys that can kind of come in and already offer high level versatility and just defensive skills, pairing that against a guy like Hooper, where I think he's just a lot farther along the curve offensively than we might have expected. And, obviously superstar defensive talent. And again, having like a wing slash forward duo for the future is definitely the goal. Having some guy that you can pair alongside a guy like Flag, whether that's in the backcourt in terms of just having your next guard or being able to kind of, position yourself in, especially when you start to see teams, in the East and the West and having these kind of wing or forward or guard duos, it's super important in kind of positioning a guy like Flag to be best insulated for a team moving forward rather than just like contending for, a high draft pick, not the playoffs. I think this is just a remarkable talent, and I think you just have to have a kind of more aggressive approach in the draft and what kind of guy that you pair alongside him.
It breaks my heart we don't have enough time to talk about Braden Burries or Pat and Gungba.
And around back, I'm telling you, there's so much talent that we could talk about. Like even maybe before
Yeah,
my
we got to do this again because I think,
For sure.
like you said, there's a lot more names that we need to talk about, and I think you kind of alluded to it as well, Mohammed. Like, the Mavericks do have this Oklahoma City pick. It's probably going to be 30th or 29th, so there's obviously names we have to consider there. But I think we're coming up on the hour here, so I think it's a good concluding point. Mohammed, appreciate you for your insights. I think I learned a lot. Like I said, I'm not the biggest college basketball guy, so I don't always watch as much as you guys do, but it's good to know, the strengths and weaknesses about some of these guys who aren't necessarily those top three players. But before we go, any closing thoughts from Mohammed and then Vinay?
I just want to say thank you guys so much for having me. It's always a pleasure when we get a chance to speak ball. And I know at the beginning of the season we were speaking about that last cycle with a guy like Cooper Flag and guys to look at. And I remember, funny enough, we were talking about a guy like Ryan Nemhart, where that was somebody that I was like, hey, if this guy gets an opportunity in the second round to get picked, I think he'd be a very valuable pick. And long and behold, he's been somebody that's been able to stick. And I think that's kind of the sentiment for Dallas is like, what kind of guy can come in maybe back into the first, if you're lucky being able to move that forward, what kind of guys just that guy will be somebody that can pair alongside Coop for the future. So definitely super excited to get a chance to speak about that more. And especially as we head into March Madness and just kind of everything settling out, would love to get a chance to speak with guys and, maybe just players to look at once you kind of get more of an idea of where you're going to fall in line with the lottery odds. But thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's always great getting a chance to speak with you guys.
Yeah, man, for sure. We'll definitely have you on again. This won't be the last time. Vinay, any closing thoughts?
Mavericks, please lose more games.
The game's gotten a lot closer now, so
I jinxed it. I shouldn't have said anything.
There's some of their starting lineup.
yeah, we need more AJ Johnson minutes now.
I'm not gonna lie. I'm kind of surprised. AJ Johnson has just been
A
not.
dud.
Yeah, I'm surprised. I mean, to be fair, when we kind of seen how much he was getting played at with Washington at the back end of the season and the flashes that he was showing, it's like, oh, you got a gem at a very low price. Where he hasn't been playing as much. It's kind of a little frustrating, obviously. Like again, if you're at that point of the year where you really don't have much to play for relative to like winning basketball, I would experiment and see what kind of guys can stick and you kind of head into next season with a lot more clear of an outlook of guys that are in rotation, guys that you can develop more. And you don't want to have that issue as you head into the next season and not knowing what does that roster look like. I think getting that continuity is good now. And like I said, what are you really truly playing for rather than odds or maybe back end of like the seeding? Not really sure.
yeah, I mean, I think you got to develop your guys, especially with the contract decision coming up for AJ Johnson. It would help to get an extended look at him. At this point in
Probably
the
going to get
season.
declined.
I mean, at this rate, if he's not able to show anything, his fault or what, I don't think it's going to get picked up. But guys, Mohammed, Vinay, thanks for joining on this episode. We'll definitely do this again soon. I think as March Madness comes along, there'll be a lot more to talk about, and then obviously the draft lottery is not that far away if you really think about it. Just over 2.5 months. So it's I can't say it's an exciting time for Mavs fans, but there's exciting times on the horizon. Yeah,
1.8, 1.8, 1.8. Come on, man.
Fingers crossed, man. Fingers crossed. Follow Mohammed on Twitter at MCFNBA. He does great work, and as the draft comes up, he's going to be putting on a lot of great stuff that I highly recommend you pay attention to. And follow us at Mavs Film Room. If you haven't done so, subscribe to us on YouTube. Appreciate everyone who tuned in. Appreciate the people in the chat. I believe it was only one person today. James Cardona 92, but shout out to you, man. Appreciate you for being loyal. We'll see you on the next stream. Go Mavs, and it's going to be interesting. So take care. We'll see y'all soon.